Hello, tonight we stand in a world of stone streets and restless shorelines, where ships creak against wooden docks and voices mingle in the warm evening air. And the feeling that life has grown larger than anyone can hold settles quietly across the Mediterranean sky. So before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories like this. Wherever you are, whatever the local time is for you, post it in the comments below. It's a comfort sometimes to remember we're all listening under the same night sky. Now, dim the lights and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The world after Alexander feels unsteady, as if the ground itself has shifted beneath familiar footsteps. Empires have stretched across continents, weaving cities, languages, and cultures together in ways that feel both wondrous and overwhelming. The old Greek polis, the small, self-contained city-state where life once felt understandable, has begun to dissolve into distant administrations and sprawling kingdoms. In the dusty air of a crowded port, traders bargain over grain and cloth, while sailors talk of lands farther away than most people will ever see. You can almost hear the quiet anxiety in their voices, a sense that decisions affecting their lives are now made in distant halls by strangers they will never meet. This is not an age of heroic certainty, but of drifting identities. Citizens become subjects. Communities stretch into networks too large to recognize. The rhythms of life change. In marketplaces from Alexandria to Corinth, coins bearing foreign faces pass from hand to hand, small reminders that power has traveled elsewhere. For many, the world feels wider than their sense of control, and the warmth of older traditions has thinned into something faint and nostalgic. The wind that moves through these streets carries the smell of salt and olive oil, but also a deeper feeling, a question that lingers behind ordinary conversation. How should a person live in a world they can no longer shape? Philosophy, once a stage for grand debates about metaphysics and abstract truth, begins to bend towards something quieter and more personal. In lecture spaces and shaded courtyards, teachers speak not only about the nature of the cosmos, but about the weight people carry inside themselves. The erosion of political certainty leaves behind a kind of emotional residue, a longing for stability that laws and armies cannot provide. Voices from different schools rise into this uncertainty. The Epicureans speak of retreat and gentle pleasure. The skeptics practice suspension of judgment. Yet across the sea of ideas, one deeper desire seems to echo, an anchor, something steady within the self when the world beyond the self will not hold still. At dusk, lanterns flicker to life above narrow streets, and conversations soften. A fisherman sits beside his nets, mending rope with slow, practiced motions. A scholar walks along a colonnade, the marble still warm from the day's sun, thinking about fate, chance, and the small territory of choice that remains to every person. The historical truth lies here in the texture of daily life. The Hellenistic kingdoms are vast, their administrations layered. Their citizens participants in a cosmopolitan world that promises opportunity while also feeding a quiet sense of powerlessness. People feel themselves carried along by currents too large to resist, like small boats on a swelling tide. Yet, even in this uncertainty, there is beauty, blue horizons, echoing temples, the hum of languages mixing in the open air. The world has not collapsed. It has simply become too wide to grasp, and that wideness presses gently against the human heart. Philosophy becomes less about boasting of wisdom and more about survival of the spirit. What can a person still claim as their own? What remains when fortune turns? In that question lies the beginning of a new tradition, one built not on escape from life, but on learning how to stand steadily inside it. Imagine the night breeze carrying the smell of smoke from nearby hearths as families settle into quiet conversation. Somewhere, a teacher speaks softly to a small circle of listeners. His tone is measured, almost soothing, as he suggests that peace is not found in the outer world, but in the way the inner world responds to it. Just like us, they fear uncertainty, they worry about loss, they wonder whether meaning can survive change. The distance between their time and ours narrows into something tender and familiar. In their searching, we recognize our own. Ships continue to arrive and depart, their hulls creaking as ropes tighten and loosen with the tide. Beyond the harbour, the hills fade into violet shadow, and the stars begin to appear, one by one, above a civilization trying to understand itself again. The longing for an anchor does not disappear with the darkness. Instead, it settles deeper, becoming an invisible weight people carry through their days. And somewhere in this restless world, in a city of marble walkways and painted walls, a man who has lost everything will soon step beneath a line of shaded columns, turning the story of misfortune into the first quiet stone of something enduring, as morning light prepares to touch the painted porch. It slips across the stones of Athens and settles along the long colonnade of the Stoa of Athens, the painted porch, where stories of old battles line the walls. And the city wakes slowly to the sound of sandals on marble and merchants setting out their wares. In that gentle light, a man stands quietly, still carrying the memory of a ship lost to the sea. His name is Zeno of Citium, a Phoenician-born merchant whose fortune once moved across the waves in cargo holds and trade routes until a storm turned certainty into wreckage and sent him drifting toward this city of thinkers. The air smells faintly of dust and olive leaves. Somewhere nearby, a vendor opens a basket of figs. Athens feels different from the great, busy ports he once knew. Here, conversation is a craft, and questions are as common as coins. Zeno walks its streets with the hesitant patience of someone who has outlived his plans. The historical accounts tell us that after losing his cargo at sea, he came to Athens around the early 3rd century BCE and wandered into a bookseller's shop, where he read about Socrates and asked where such men could be found. The answer led him into the company of philosophers, and eventually, beneath this porch. There, the painted panels behind him show warriors locked in ancient struggles, but Zeno's gaze turns inward toward a quieter battlefield. He has known the fragility of wealth, the thin line between security and despair. What remains, he wonders, when fortune disappears? His voice is low, unhurried, when he begins to speak to the small circle gathering around him. They are students, passers-by, strangers drawn by curiosity. The city hums beyond the columns, carts rolling, pigeons scattering, yet within the shade of the porch, the world narrows into a single, thoughtful space. Zeno does not promise escape from uncertainty. He does not claim that life will obey desire. Instead, he speaks of alignment, of living in agreement with nature, with the rational order of the universe the Greeks call the Logos. The wind moves through the colonnade as he explains that while the outer world may be unpredictable, the inner world can be shaped through discipline and understanding. Virtue, he says, is the only true good. Everything else, wealth, status, reputation, belongs to the realm of chance. One listener shifts his weight, perhaps thinking of debts or business disputes, and Zeno gently reminds him that character remains when circumstances fall away, and quietly, that no one has ever successfully negotiated with fate like a market price. A small smile flickers across the group. Morning deepens into afternoon. The marble warms. This is not a school of cloistered mysticism, but of public life lived thoughtfully, right here where citizens walk and traders bargain. The porch becomes both classroom and refuge, open to anyone who can pause long enough to listen. Zeno's teaching grows from personal loss, yet it reaches outward, becoming a guide for those who also feel unmoored in a world too vast to master. In time, others gather to stand beside him. Cleanthes, once a water carrier who labored through the night to support his studies, writing hymns to the cosmic order, and later Chrysippus, tireless and precise, who shapes the arguments and logic that will give Stoicism its firm foundations. Their presence gives the school continuity, a sense that something solid is being built here, stone by patient stone, thought by careful thought. The air around the porch carries the soft echoes of their discussions, questions about fate, freedom, and the small territory of the will. Across the city, people live ordinary lives, craftsmen shaping tools, children chasing one another through sunlit courtyards, officials reading decrees in shaded offices. But under the Stoa, the conversation is quietly radical. To live well, Zeno says, is not to control the world, it is to control one's judgment about it, to choose courage over fear, integrity over expedience, clarity over confusion. The sea may take ships, rulers may change laws, fortune may turn without warning, yet the mind can answer with steadiness, like a hand resting calmly on a moving rail. A breeze drifts through, lifting the edge of a cloak. You can almost hear the rhythm of his words, simple and direct, shaped not for display but for use. This is philosophy as practice, not ornament, something a person can carry back into noise, into work, into uncertainty. Just like us, those who gather here hope for tools strong enough to hold against disruption. They do not seek perfection, they seek resilience. As seasons pass, the porch becomes a symbol as much as a place. Travelers bring news of empires and politics, yet students return to these same columns, this same painted wall, and the same steady tone of instruction. Zeno's life continues modestly. Tradition tells of his restraint, his calm temperament, his refusal to chase luxury again. His shipwreck becomes more than an accident, it becomes a turning point that demonstrates a lesson he now teaches. What seems like ruin may reveal the path to wisdom. Toward evening, the sunlight thins and stretches across the flagstones, and the voices beneath the Stoa soften. The city cools. Steps fade along the street. Zeno's followers linger a little longer, repeating to themselves fragments of ideas, testing them against their own private worries. The painted porch stands quiet, holding within its columns the first outlines of a philosophy that will travel far beyond Athens, carried by memory, by teaching, and by lives changed in small, deliberate ways. And as the day exhales into twilight, the questions they have begun to ask about reason, about the structure of the cosmos, about the connection between knowledge and the way a person ought to live, wait gently in the warm evening air, ready to unfold into a deeper framework of thought that will give their searching minds a shape. As the garden paths of the next day lead toward logic, physics, and the ethics of the soul, the path opens into a quiet garden where the air is cool in the early morning and leaves stir softly above a circle of students seated on low benches, listening as ideas take careful shape. The city beyond the walls is waking distant footsteps, a cart rolling over stone, but here the rhythm is slower, measured, almost architectural. A teacher's voice moves gently from thought to thought, as if laying foundations for something meant to last. The early Stoics believed that a life could not be steady without structure, and so they built one, a framework made of three interwoven parts: logic, physics, and ethics. Not separate subjects, but strands of a single rope. Logic, they explain, guards the mind against confusion. Physics reveals the nature of the world we inhabit. Ethics shows how a person should live within that world. The breeze carries the smell of earth and cypress as the listeners lean forward, recognizing that this is not theory for its own sake. Each piece exists to support the art of living well. Logic comes first, not to encourage argument, but to protect clarity. In this garden, Chrysippus is said to have refined Stoic logic with tireless dedication, shaping ideas about language, propositions, and truth. The historical record remembers him as a thinker who wrote extensively hundreds of works, many of which help define how the school reasoned about cause, meaning, and inference. His students practice distinguishing what merely appears true from what actually is true. They examine impressions the way a jeweler studies a coin in sunlight, testing it, turning it, refusing to accept a false surface. Words matter, assumptions matter. A misplaced belief, they say, can bend an entire life out of shape. You can almost feel the discipline of their thinking, steady, patient, like hands sorting threads before weaving them into cloth. The garden remains quiet except for the rustle of branches and the low murmur of questions. Logic becomes a kind of inner craftsmanship, a way of training the mind to avoid deception, especially self-deception. The reflection lingers. Just as we misread the world in moments of fear or haste, they too confronted illusions of status, rumor, and emotion, and sought tools strong enough to steady their judgment. From logic, the conversation widens outward into physics, not in the modern sense of equations and laboratories, but as a contemplation of the cosmos itself. The Stoics describe a universe permeated by a rational organizing principle, the logos. Everything, they say, is part of a single, living whole. Fire, earth, breath, and reason interlace through matter, like order through a tapestry. Nothing stands isolated. Every event belongs to a chain of causes that stretches through time. The sun warms the stones at the garden's edge, and the idea settles gently into the listeners' minds. To live is to participate in a web of natural law and necessity. In this view, fate is not a cold prison, but a pattern firm, intricate, often beyond human understanding. The Stoics do not deny sorrow or loss. They simply place them within a larger frame. A leaf falling, a city rising, a friendship ending, all are moments within the vast unfolding of nature's rational order. The historical anchor rests here. Early Stoic physics drew from Heraclitean fire and the idea of a cyclical cosmos periodically renewed, a world animated by divine reason rather than by distant, indifferent gods. To understand nature is to understand one's position within it, not as a master, but as a participant. The garden air warms as the morning advances. A bee passes near a stone bench. Someone asks quietly where human freedom belongs in such a determined universe. The answer comes slowly, the words careful and calm. While the outer chain of events may be fixed by nature, the inner response remains our own. We cannot choose the weather of the world, they say, but we can choose the climate of the soul. A small smile moves through the group when the teacher adds that fate may control whether a cart begins to roll downhill, but only we decide whether to ride it with dignity or complain the entire way. From here, the path leads naturally to ethics, the heart of the system, the reason the others exist. Ethics is not a list of rules, but the cultivation of virtue, wisdom, justice, courage, moderation, the qualities that allow a person to live in harmony with both reason and nature. Virtue, they repeat, is the only true good. Wealth, health, reputation, even comfort belong to the realm of the indifferent. They may be welcomed, but they do not define a good life. A person may be poor and virtuous, or rich and lost. The difference lies not in possessions, but in character. You can almost sense the tension and relief in the listeners as they absorb this idea. It loosens one kind of pressure while deepening another. If goodness does not depend on fortune, then a meaningful life remains possible even in hardship, but it also means there is no excuse for injustice or cowardice when circumstances grow difficult. Ethics asks for steadiness, not perfection, direction, not spectacle. The garden's shadows shorten as the day settles into its middle hours, and the students sit quietly, measuring these thoughts against their own lives. The Stoics do not separate ethics from daily experience. They ask how one should speak to a friend, how to face illness, how to hold authority, how to accept loss. They believe the world's rational order gives each person a role, like a part in a play. We do not choose our script, our birth, our body, our time, but we choose how well we perform it. The reflection is gentle and human. Just like us, they hope to act with dignity in situations they could not fully control, to respond to change without losing themselves. A breeze passes through the trees, carrying the scent of crushed grass. Someone repeats the framework softly, logic, physics, ethics, as if confirming the shape of an invisible structure now standing inside them. The three parts support one another. Logic ensures clear thinking. Physics grounds that thinking in a meaningful universe. Ethics guides action within that universe toward virtue and calm. Without logic, ethics would drift. Without physics, virtue would lack context. Together, they form what one might call an operating blueprint for the soul. As the afternoon light turns warmer, the voices grow quieter. The garden grows still, and the framework remains not a cage, but a map. It does not promise safety from misfortune, yet it offers steadiness amid uncertainty, a way to meet the world without being crushed by it. The students rise slowly, carrying these ideas back toward the streets and markets, where choices await in small gestures and difficult moments. And as they leave the garden, the questions of practice begin to emerge: how this ordered philosophy will travel beyond Athens, across seas, and into new languages and lives, where rulers, generals, and statesmen will test its principles against the realities of power and responsibility, as the road ahead stretches quietly toward Rome and the wide world beyond. The road follows the line of the coast and the curve of empire, until philosophy, once spoken beneath painted columns, begins to travel with merchants, diplomats, and scholars across the sea. The air shifts from the dry clarity of Athenian gardens to the heavier scent of Roman streets, where baking bread, leather, and smoke mingle beneath tall insulae and echoing arches. Here, power feels closer, more practical, more immediate. Letters are sealed, judgments are issued, and lives are shaped not only by fate, but by law, duty, and office. Into this world, Stoicism arrives not as a distant theory, but as something people might learn to use. On the Palatine Hill and in the quiet courtyards of wealthy homes, new conversations begin. The Romans admire strength, discipline, and composure qualities they gather beneath the word gravitas, and in the teachings brought from Greece they recognize a language for their own ideals. The historical record remembers Panaetius of Rhodes in the 2nd century BCE as one of the first to weave Stoic thought into Roman life. He walks among senators, advising friends like Scipio Aemilianus, softening certain doctrines, loosening the strict edges of earlier dogma, shaping philosophy into a guide suited for statesmen who must deliberate, negotiate, and lead. Under his influence, Stoicism begins to lean toward practicality, toward the art of character in public responsibility. Across the courtyards, conversation stretches into evening. Oil lamps flicker. Servants pass gently in the background while ideas rest on polished tables alongside ledgers and letters. Panaetius speaks of virtue not only as inner excellence, but as conduct, how one treats allies and rivals, how one bears authority without arrogance, how one endures uncertainty without losing composure. The philosophy that once grew from a merchant shipwreck now becomes a companion for men who command armies and govern provinces. Rome reshapes Stoicism even as Stoicism reshapes Rome, drawing it away from austere abstraction and toward lived decision-making in the corridors of power. In the following generation, another voice deepens this bridge between worlds, Posidonius of Apamea. He travels widely, observes cultures, maps coastlines, and studies the sea's tides. His interests range from astronomy to psychology. Rome respects him not merely as a philosopher, but as a scholar whose mind mirrors the empire's vastness. Through his teaching, Stoicism absorbs a broader awareness of history, emotion, and society. He writes about human passions as natural forces, not enemies, and describes how reason can guide them rather than crush them. Somewhere on a veranda overlooking a calm harbor, students listen as he explains that the mind is like a city. Its order must be tended, its walls strengthened, its streets cleared of confusion. The atmosphere of Roman Stoicism feels different from the shaded Porch of Athens. Here, the philosophy lives among marble council chambers and dusty military roads, among letters carried by couriers and decisions made after sleepless nights. A provincial governor stands on a balcony at dawn, hearing distant sounds from the forum below, and turns silently to words he has learned from this school, that virtue lies not in outcomes, but in integrity of judgment. Just like us, they face days shaped by responsibilities they did not fully choose, wondering how to act rightly when the world presses from every side. The framework remains logic for clarity, physics for understanding, ethics for living, but its emphasis begins to tilt. Roman audiences care less about cosmological fire and more about steadiness in the face of fear, temptation, and duty. Philosophy becomes a companion to law and citizenship. It teaches officials to accept what lies beyond their control: storms, rebellions, illness, rumor, while focusing on what remains theirs: their honesty, their restraint, their courage. In a quiet corner of a villa, a young magistrate repeats a line to himself before entering judgment, reminding his restless heart that the only thing he can truly command is the spirit with which he acts. And perhaps, he thinks with a small inward smile, his schedule, though even that rarely obeys him. Evening settles across the Tiber, and the city glows in soft amber light. The influence of Stoicism has begun to sink into letters, speeches, and moral reflections. Cicero, though not a Stoic himself, writes works inspired by Epictetus, spreading Stoic ethics throughout the Roman world and giving it Latin voice. The philosophy becomes not a sect for specialists, but a language shared by administrators, generals, and thinkers seeking guidance during uncertain times. In its Roman form, Stoicism learns to walk inside politics without losing sight of the inner life. Yet with this closeness to power comes tension. The philosophy that speaks of virtue and self-mastery now lives beside ambition, intrigue, and fragile authority. In grand halls where decisions carry the weight of life and exile, the Stoic ideal must confront the realities of empire, favoritism, fear, and the shifting moods of emperors. Rome tests the school more harshly than Athens ever did. The wind moves through colonnades at night, and those who practice this discipline ask themselves whether wisdom can coexist with influence, whether calm can survive proximity to command. Across the decades, the seed planted under the porch grows into something both noble and precarious. Stoicism has become a guide for leaders, a compass for moral conduct, and a quiet strength carried beneath ceremonial robes. But in the shadows of palaces and courtyards, the philosophy will soon meet a more personal trial, not in theory, but in the life of a man who writes beautifully about virtue while standing at the edge of danger, his words composed in the soft light of lamplight while power roars just beyond the door, like a distant lion in the dark. Its presence felt more than heard, and within that uneasy closeness to power sits Lucius Annaeus Seneca, scholar, statesman, and writer, composing sentences as carefully as one might place stepping stones across a river. The rooms around him are furnished with polished wood and bronze, the air touched with the faint smell of oil lamps and parchment. Outside, Rome murmurs servants moving through corridors, guards exchanging quiet words, rumors drifting like smoke through halls where decisions echo far beyond their walls. Inside, Seneca writes with a calm that does not erase his tension, but shapes it into thought. He was born in Corduba, raised in Rome, trained in rhetoric, and drawn early into the life of politics. By the 1st century CE, he stands near the center of imperial power, first exiled under Claudius, then recalled, eventually becoming tutor and advisor to the young emperor Nero. He is wealthy, influential, admired for his eloquence, and yet surrounded by danger. The historical record reminds us that court life under Nero was unpredictable, shifting from favor to suspicion with little warning. In this world, philosophy is not a distant exercise. It is a lifeline woven through fear, responsibility, and compromise. The lamp on his desk glows softly as he bends over a sheet of papyrus, writing the lines that will one day become the letters to Lucilius. They are not treatises in grand public language, but intimate reflections addressed to a friend, part guidance, part confession, part self-correction. He writes about time, anger, death, wealth, friendship, and the slow work of shaping one's character. The tone is patient, almost conversational, as if he is speaking across a quiet table rather than from the center of the empire. You can almost hear the scratch of the stylus, the faint movement of fabric as he adjusts his sleeve, the sound of life continuing somewhere down the corridor. Seneca's world is one of contradiction. He praises simplicity while living among luxury. He writes of detachment from wealth while possessing large estates, villas, and investments. He calls for courage and virtue while navigating the subtle dangers of politics. The tension is real, and he does not hide it. In his letters, moments of self-awareness emerge gently. He acknowledges his own shortcomings, the compromises required by public life, the difficulty of living fully in accord with the ideals he teaches. His honesty becomes a form of humility, a quiet recognition that philosophy is not a badge of perfection but a practice of return. Around him, the house settles into evening. A servant passes softly at the doorway. Somewhere in the city, a chariot rattles over stone. Seneca speaks of time as the most precious resource, slipping away unnoticed while people chase status and fear loss. He urges Lucilius and, by extension himself, to withdraw from distraction, to reclaim attention, to cultivate an inner life that does not sway with fortune. Just like us, they wrestle with restlessness, with the pull of obligation and desire, with anxieties that arrive uninvited in the quiet hours of night. He turns often to the Stoic principle that the only true good lies in virtue, and that suffering arises less from events than from judgments about them. Yet for Seneca, these ideas are not abstract. They reach into his own experiences: exile, illness, danger, and the constant uncertainty of imperial favor. He writes about fear without theatricality, about death without drama, inviting his reader to consider mortality as a fact of nature rather than an enemy. Outside, the city moves through its rhythms. Inside, his words cultivate a stillness that feels like a small harbor against the storm of court life. At times, his reflections become deeply personal. He speaks of anger as a fire that consumes the one who carries it, of grief as something to be honored but not allowed to govern the soul. He encourages kindness, restraint, and generosity virtues that soften the hardness of power. The letters read like quiet exercises in becoming steadier, not through withdrawal from the world, but through a clearer understanding of one's own mind. A faint breeze passes through the open window. The fabric of a curtain stirs. Seneca pauses, then continues writing, as if each sentence steadies his hand and heart a little more. Still, the paradox remains. He is both teacher and participant in a world of privilege and fear. Critics then and now have questioned the sincerity of a philosopher who writes about poverty while owning so much. Yet within the letters there is a kind of struggle that feels honest, not a denial of contradiction, but a man trying to live thoughtfully in conditions far from ideal, shaping his philosophy to survive the pressures of power rather than to escape them. He does not present himself as a sage above the world, but as a traveler on the same uneven road. In the quieter passages, he reminds Lucilius that fortune can turn in an instant, that security built on wealth or rank is fragile, that peace arises not from possession, but from inner order. He repeats that what lies within our control is the realm of judgment, intention, and effort, while the outcomes of those efforts remain the domain of fate. Somewhere in the background, the echo of Roman politics lingers like a distant drum. Decisions are made, alliances shift, trust frays, and Seneca's counsel becomes not only philosophical but protective, a way of preserving integrity in a world where missteps carry heavy consequences. Years pass. The relationship with Nero grows strained, then perilous. Accusations rise, rumors harden into threats. The lion in the distance moves closer. When Seneca is finally ordered to take his own life, the historical accounts describe a scene both stark and controlled. He meets his fate with composure, speaking calmly to friends, embodying the Stoic acceptance he had long written about. Whether every detail of those accounts is precise or embellished, the image remains a philosopher attempting to match his final actions with the discipline of his words. The room grows quiet again in memory, and his letters endure, carrying the sound of his voice across centuries, steady, reflective, neither triumphant nor bitter. They remind us that Stoicism does not belong only to the free, the strong, or the untroubled. It belongs equally to those who walk through uncertainty and contradiction, who struggle and falter and still return, gently, to the work of shaping their inner life. The lion's shadow fades, leaving behind pages filled with a calm that was learned, not inherited, a calm that rests, not in perfection, but in the courage to keep practicing. And as those pages travel outward, carried by readers and students into distant provinces and later ages, the philosophy leaves the marble halls of Rome and moves toward a smaller, harsher room, where another figure, once a slave, with little to his name but his own mind, will take these same ideas and refine them into something even more austere, even more inward, a discipline forged not beside power, but in the absence of it, as the path turns quietly toward the unbreakable strength of Epictetus. There is a small room, plain and without ornament, somewhere along a quiet street in Nicopolis. The floor is swept, the benches are simple, and the air carries the faint echo of voices that have gathered here before. Students arrive not for displays of rhetoric or theatrical performance, but to listen to a man who owns almost nothing, and yet speaks as if he possesses a fortress no storm can reach. His name is Epictetus, and his life has been shaped by hardship long before he ever became a teacher. He was born into slavery, his body belonging to another person, his future determined by commands rather than choices. For years he served in Rome, first in the household of Epaphroditus, a powerful courtier in the orbit of the Emperor Nero. In that environment, ambition, fear, and danger were woven into daily life. But even there, Epictetus found a small space within himself that no master could occupy. That inner space would become the foundation of his philosophy. During those years, he listened to lectures by the Stoic teacher Musonius Rufus, a man who believed philosophy was not an ornament for elite minds, but a practical craft for living well. Epictetus absorbed that lesson deeply. Philosophy, he learned, is not for debate halls or festivals of intellect. It is for the moments when one is hungry, frightened, ashamed, or uncertain, and still needs to choose how to act. At some point, Epictetus was freed. The details are mostly unknown, but freedom did not turn him toward luxury or status. Instead, political tides in Rome forced many philosophers into exile, and Epictetus left the city behind. He traveled across the sea to Greece and settled in Nicopolis, a place quiet enough for reflection, and yet filled with students who were willing to journey far just to hear him speak. There he opened a modest school, and his real work began. Epictetus did not write his own books. The words we know come from his student Arian, who recorded the conversations, lessons, and exchanges that took place in that humble room. The tone of those dialogues is direct. There is little ornament, little drama, only steady guidance, shaped by someone who has already lost comfort, status, security, and health, and has learned to live without bitterness. One of Epictetus's central ideas is disarmingly simple. Some things are in our control, and some things are not. Our opinions, choices, and responses belong to us. Our bodies, reputations, wealth, and circumstances do not. The line may seem basic, but for Epictetus it is the difference between bondage and freedom. A chain placed on the wrist can imprison a body. A chain placed on one's judgment through fear, anger, or desire imprisons the soul. He invites his students to examine their reactions to the world. A rude insult, a sudden misfortune, an unexpected loss, these events do not harm us by themselves. The harm begins when we interpret them as unbearable, unjust, or catastrophic. If we pause, look clearly, and remember what belongs to us and what does not, we discover a new kind of strength. The world may shake, but our judgment can remain steady. This way of thinking does not erase pain or difficulty. Epictetus acknowledges suffering plainly. Illness hurts, poverty is hard, exile wounds the heart. But he refuses to grant these conditions the power to define a person's worth. A good life, he says, is not built on possessions, approval, or fortune. It is built on character, on discipline, honesty, fairness, and the quiet courage to accept reality as it is, rather than how we wish it would be. Students often come to Epictetus with anxieties about status, reputation, and failure. He answers with examples drawn from ordinary situations. If you fear the theatre crowd's opinion, he says, you become their servant. If you chase admiration, you allow strangers to rule your peace of mind. Freedom begins when you no longer measure your life by the noise of others, but by the integrity of your choices. The only true disgrace is abandoning your principles. In his school, philosophy is practiced through small exercises. Wake in the morning and remember what you can control today. Walk through the marketplace and notice how many things tempt or disturb you. Pause before anger takes hold. Question your first judgments. Treat others with dignity, not because it benefits you, but because it is the right thing to do. These are not heroic gestures. They are quiet acts of inner training, repeated again and again. Epictetus also speaks about fate, not as a crushing force, but as a structure within which we must act. We cannot choose where we are born or when we die, but we can choose how we meet each moment between those 2 points. To resist reality is to exhaust oneself. To cooperate with it, while still living morally, is to find harmony with the larger order of the world. A good person, he says, is like a traveler willing to walk the road laid before them with patience and clarity. His words reach far beyond the small room in Nicopolis. Soldiers, statesmen, and ordinary citizens carry his ideas back to their own lives. Some discover them much later, in distant lands and quiet libraries. The resonance endures because his lessons speak to fears that rarely change. Fear of loss, fear of judgment, fear of uncertainty. Epictetus does not promise comfort. He offers something sturdier, the ability to remain steady when comfort disappears. In time, his teachings influence emperors, scholars, and spiritual traditions. But in their original form, they remain intimate, a teacher and a group of listeners, exploring how to live with dignity under pressure. The story of Epictetus reminds us that wisdom does not always emerge from wealth or status. Sometimes it grows in places where choice is limited, where life is difficult, and where a person learns to defend the only territory no one else can claim, the territory of the mind. And so, in that modest room beneath a roof that creaks in the wind, the lesson repeats with quiet consistency. True freedom does not arrive when the world changes. It begins when we learn to govern ourselves, to meet hardship without surrendering our values, and to discover in the smallest, most disciplined thoughts a strength that cannot be taken away. There is a tent somewhere on the northern frontier of the Roman Empire. Outside, the earth is cold, the air carries the faint smell of smoke, and distant campfires flicker like quiet signals in the dark. Inside, the noise of soldiers fades into a muted rhythm. An emperor sits alone with a wax tablet or a small notebook, not as a ruler addressing his people, but as a man speaking only to himself. His name is Marcus Aurelius, and the words he writes tonight are not meant for display or fame. They are reminders, small anchors against the pressure of power, the uncertainty of war, and the weight of responsibility that never leaves his shoulders. Marcus did not seek to become a philosopher king in a romantic sense. He grew into the role through discipline, mentorship, and duty. Adopted into the imperial family as a boy, he was educated in rhetoric, law, and administration. Yet what seemed to shape him most deeply was philosophy. From early childhood, he was drawn not to luxury or intrigue, but to teachers who valued restraint, humility, and clarity of thought. He learned that character is something built deliberately, decision by decision, not something granted by birth or status. The empire he inherited was vast and restless. Borders needed defending, bureaucracies needed management, and the constant demands of politics never disappeared. At the same time, Marcus faced illness, personal grief, and betrayal. His life was not one of uninterrupted triumph, far from it. His reign unfolded under the pressure of plagues, invasions, and crises that demanded strength without cruelty and firmness without arrogance. It is within this atmosphere that his private writings begin to take shape. The entries that survive are now known as meditations, though Marcus himself did not give them that title. They read less like essays and more like quiet instructions to a tired but determined mind. He reminds himself to remain calm in the face of insult, to accept the limits of human control, and to treat others with patience, even when their behavior frustrates him. The voice is earnest, measured, and disciplined. It does not seek brilliance, it seeks steadiness. Marcus often writes about the fleeting nature of life. In the privacy of his tent, he reflects on how emperors, generals, and heroes of earlier centuries have vanished from memory, along with their triumphs and ambitions. This is not a gesture of despair, but an exercise in perspective. If everything passes, then clinging too tightly to fame, success, or anger is unnecessary. What remains meaningful, he reminds himself, is acting with justice, courage, and reason in each moment, while it is still available. He also speaks to himself about anger, especially the kind that arises from disappointment in other people. Surrounded by advisors, soldiers, and political rivals, Marcus is constantly exposed to selfishness and ambition. Yet he insists that human beings act out of ignorance, habit, or fear more often than malice. If we remember that others are part of the same human community, he writes, we can respond not with bitterness, but with understanding and firmness combined. To be harsh is easy. To be fair without losing authority is a more demanding discipline. In these quiet reflections, Marcus explores a central Stoic theme, control of the inner life. The world around him is filled with uncertainty, military campaigns that stretch across harsh landscapes, shifting alliances, and losses that cannot always be prevented. But within his own judgment, he seeks order. He repeats to himself that events are beyond his command, while his responses belong fully to him. By returning to this idea again and again, he practices the same mental training that Epictetus once taught in a small school far away. The tent becomes a symbolic space. It is both a command post and a personal refuge. Decisions made there will affect thousands of lives, yet the reflections written there are intimate and unguarded. Marcus does not write as a distant figure of authority. He writes as a man struggling to stay aligned with his values, aware of his flaws, and uncertain whether he is always succeeding. The honesty in these lines is what gives them their quiet power. His thoughts also turn to duty. Unlike philosophers who could withdraw from public life, Marcus has no such luxury. His identity is inseparable from his responsibilities. He belongs to Rome, to the army, and to the role he has inherited. Yet rather than resent this burden, he reminds himself that every role in life comes with tasks that must be fulfilled. A tree must grow, a horse must run, and a human being must act in accordance with reason and community. The emperor, too, must serve. In this framework, leadership is not about domination or glory. It is about stewardship, guiding others without vanity, making decisions without cruelty, and accepting criticism without bitterness. Marcus encourages himself to be a ruler who lives as an example rather than a spectacle. He writes that true greatness lies not in grand gestures, but in consistent integrity, even when no one is watching. Throughout his reflections, there is also a tone of resignation that is not defeatist, but realistic. Marcus acknowledges that many outcomes will not match his hopes. Friends may betray him, plans may fail, illness may persist, war may continue longer than expected. Yet he teaches himself that disappointment does not have to lead to despair. What matters is continuing to act honorably within imperfect circumstances. The standard is not success, the standard is moral effort. Sometimes his writing returns to deeply personal grief. He experienced loss within his own family, including the deaths of children. In those moments, philosophy is not an abstract exercise, but a tool for enduring sorrow without collapsing beneath it. He reminds himself that every human life is fragile, including those he loves most. Acceptance does not remove pain, but it prevents pain from hardening into bitterness. In grief, Marcus searches for compassion rather than self-pity. The northern campaigns continue year after year, and the tent remains a recurring setting. Marcus ages, his body weakens, yet the act of writing to himself endures. Each entry becomes a conversation across time, the emperor of one night reminding the emperor of the next morning how to remain steady. These writings form a private discipline, a quiet rehearsal for the difficulties that tomorrow may bring. The legacy of these reflections would stretch far beyond his lifetime. They would be copied, translated, and studied by readers who would never know the cold nights or distant frontiers where they were first written. What makes them endure is not the authority of an emperor, but the vulnerability of a human being trying to live wisely in circumstances he cannot fully control. Marcus Aurelius does not present himself as a sage who has mastered every weakness. Instead, he records a long effort to remain thoughtful, restrained, and humane under pressure. His journal is a map of effort rather than perfection. That makes it recognizable to anyone who has faced responsibility, fatigue, or doubt, and still wanted to do the right thing. In the hush of the tent, the emperor sets his stylus down. Outside, the wind moves lightly across the camp, carrying the muted cadence of distant voices. Tomorrow will bring decisions, negotiations, reports from generals, and the demands of command. But for this moment, Marcus has given himself something quieter, a reminder of who he intends to be, regardless of what the world requires of him. His reflections remain as a final link in the long chain of Stoic thought, from the painted porch in Athens to the modest school of Epictetus to the lonely tent of an emperor who tries, with patience and self-examination, to hold steady against sorrow, duty, and the unending weight of the crown. And when the tent finally grows quiet, the philosophy that sustained an emperor does not disappear, but begins to drift forward through time, sometimes carried openly, sometimes hidden in borrowed language, sometimes sleeping beneath new traditions that reshape the world around it. After Marcus Aurelius, Stoicism no longer stands at the center of public life. The Roman world changes. Power shifts, religions rise, and a new spiritual vocabulary spreads across the Mediterranean. The old schools close, not in a single dramatic moment, but in a gradual fading, like a lamp burning down to a small, persistent ember. In the early centuries of Christianity, many values that once belonged to the Stoics begin to echo quietly in a different register. The call to discipline the passions, to stand firm in hardship, to accept suffering without bitterness, these move from the porticos of Athens into monasteries, hermit cells, and quiet chapels. Monks retreat into desert landscapes, where wind moves over stone and prayers take the place of philosophical lectures. They speak of humility, endurance, and inner watchfulness. They rarely use Stoic terminology, yet some of the habits feel familiar: the careful examination of thoughts, the training of the will, the effort to align inner life with a higher order. Texts continue to survive, not always celebrated, but preserved. In Byzantine scriptoria, careful hands copy manuscripts, even when their origins lie outside theology. In the libraries of the Islamic Golden Age, scholars translate Greek works into Arabic, studying logic, ethics, and natural philosophy with patience and curiosity. Ideas travel along trade routes and intellectual networks, crossing deserts and sea lanes, carried in ink rather than on the banners of armies. The ancient conversations do not shout, they murmur softly beneath new debates about faith, law, and metaphysics. Centuries pass, empires shift, cities rise and fall, yet somewhere in a quiet study, a scholar opens an old book and encounters voices from another age. During the Renaissance, Europe rediscovers classical learning with deliberate reverence. The dust is lifted from forgotten shelves. Petrarch reads ancient letters and feels a living presence in them, not merely history but guidance. Later, Justus Lipsius attempts to revive Stoic ethics for a turbulent world filled with political wars and religious conflict. He does not copy the ancient system exactly. Instead, he adapts it, seeking steadiness in an age of uncertainty. Philosophy becomes once again a medicine for anxious times. In the 16th and 17th centuries, the Stoic tone, calm, disciplined, reflective, finds new listeners among statesmen, scholars, and artists. The idea that virtue rests in self-command, that fate must be met with courage, that dignity survives even in hardship, begins to resonate with people who navigate fragile political orders. The world feels unpredictable, stretched between reformations and revolutions, and Stoicism offers not escape but composure. With the Enlightenment, reason becomes a guiding star, and Stoic ideas enter new conversations about citizenship, duty, and natural law. Philosophers debate the place of human beings in the cosmos, no longer through divine myths or imperial ritual, but through rational inquiry. The belief that all people share a common rational nature, an idea already present in the old Stoic cosmopolis, begins to influence political thought. Across the Atlantic, some of the founding fathers read Marcus Aurelius and Seneca, finding in their pages a sense of discipline and civic responsibility. Stoicism does not dictate laws, but it helps shape the moral atmosphere in which those laws are imagined. Time continues forward, and the world enters the modern age. Factories rise, cities expand, technology shrinks distances and multiplies distractions. In this new landscape, a different kind of anxiety appears, not the fear of invasion or crop failure, but the strain of noise, speed, and constant change. Once again, people begin to search for a philosophy that can help them stand quietly within motion. The language is new, but the need feels old. In the 20th century, psychology emerges as a field devoted to the workings of the mind, and here, a bridge forms almost unnoticed. Therapists studying how thoughts shape emotions rediscover principles that sound remarkably familiar. Cognitive behavioral therapy is built on the insight that beliefs about events influence how we experience them, echoing Epictetus's reminder that people are disturbed not by things, but by their judgments about things. This is not merely historical coincidence. Some of the founders of these methods openly acknowledge Stoic influence, recognizing that ancient practices of mental reframing hold practical power in modern clinical work. Across lecture halls and quiet offices, new handbooks appear, not philosophical treatises, but practical guides for resilience, focus, and emotional clarity. They do not require marble colonnades or imperial tents. They require only a mind willing to observe itself honestly. The old exercises return in new forms: journaling, reflection on mortality, the habit of distinguishing what one can and cannot control. These practices move from scholarly discussion into everyday life, into notebooks, planners, whispered reminders before difficult conversations. Meanwhile, translations of the classics spread widely. Marcus Aurelius becomes a companion book on bedside tables. Seneca's letters travel around the world. Epictetus speaks again from small paperbacks, his words crossing centuries to sit quietly in cafes, libraries, and commuter trains. People read not for argument, but for steadiness, for a sense that someone, long ago, faced uncertainty with composure and left behind a lantern for those who would come after. Stoicism no longer belongs to a single school or city. It becomes a traveler, picked up by historians, entrepreneurs, teachers, soldiers, and ordinary people who simply want to live with greater clarity. Some explore it as a daily discipline, others as a quiet companion for difficult seasons. It adapts, as it always has, without losing its core, a commitment to inner strength, to reason guided by empathy, and to the acceptance that the world unfolds beyond our command. And so the philosophy that once slept beneath layers of history slowly awakens again, not loudly, but patiently. It rises in classrooms, in therapy rooms, in late-night reflections at kitchen tables. It finds its place in a modern world that feels wide, fast, and fragile, just as the Hellenistic world once did. The questions remain the same: how to remain steady when life grows uncertain, how to act with integrity when outcomes cannot be guaranteed, how to build a calm center within the movement of events. Outside, the centuries continue to turn, and the old wisdom waits at the threshold of the present. Somewhere ahead lies a new landscape, one shaped by screens, messages, and restless information, where ancient steadiness will be tested once more, under a faint electric glow that flickers softly in the dark. The ancient voice of Stoicism steps into the present, not as a relic or ornament, but as a quiet companion for lives surrounded by noise. The world now hums with signals, scrolling messages, and the soft mechanical rhythm of devices resting on bedside tables. Cities do not sleep the way they once did. Streets glow at midnight. Conversations travel instantly across oceans. And yet, beneath all this movement, a familiar feeling returns, the sense of being small inside something vast, of searching for steadiness in a world that moves faster than the human heart can fully follow. Screens illuminate faces in dim rooms. News flows without pause. The future feels both available and uncertain at the same time. Careers shift, relationships stretch across distances, and expectations multiply. The old anxieties of empire and battlefield have become new anxieties of information and pace. People lie awake, not hearing marching boots or distant horns, but the soft echo of unanswered messages and thoughts that refuse to settle. In this new landscape, Stoicism does not appear as an ancient monument. It arrives as a set of quiet habits, almost like breathing patterns for the mind. A modern Stoic may begin the day before sunrise, when the world is still subdued and the sky carries only a faint suggestion of light. They might sit at a kitchen table or beside a window and open a notebook. The page becomes a place to sort the day before it unfolds, a place to name what can be controlled and what must simply be met with calm acceptance. The task list becomes less about dominance and more about intention. The handwriting is slow, steady, deliberate. It is not about efficiency, it is about clarity. Throughout the day, challenges emerge in small, modern shapes. A delayed message, a misunderstanding in tone, a decision that requires patience instead of impulse. The Stoic lesson that thoughts shape experience becomes a guiding thread. Instead of racing with every reaction, the modern Stoic pauses, observes, and chooses a response. There is no audience for this practice. It is unseen, quiet, internal. But in this silence, strength accumulates, one choice at a time. Many find guidance through voices carried by headphones, podcasts recorded in bedrooms and studios where speakers talk gently about presence, discipline, and perspective. Others read lines from Marcus Aurelius before sleep, or revisit Epictetus in the middle of a difficult season. Some share reflections online, turning the old Porch of Athens into a digital gathering place where strangers encourage one another towards steadier minds. The tools are new, but the aspiration remains old, to live deliberately rather than reactively. The philosophy does not ask people to withdraw from the world or to harden themselves against feeling. Instead, it invites a grounded way of participating to care, but not to be consumed, to act with courage, but not with panic, to recognize limits without surrendering purpose. It reminds the modern listener that identity does not need to rest in constant comparison or public approval. The inner citadel, that quiet space of reason and conscience, becomes a refuge, not a fortress. It is a room with open windows, where clarity makes engagement kinder, steadier, more humane. Evening arrives. The screens dim, but their afterglow lingers faintly on the walls. The day settles into memory, carrying small successes and quiet frustrations alike. The modern Stoic reflects, not with judgment, but with gentle honesty, where patience held, where irritation slipped through, where courage appeared in an unexpected moment. This reflection is not punishment, it is care, a way of tending the inner life so that tomorrow may unfold with a little more steadiness. Outside, the city or countryside rests beneath the same sky that once stretched over Athens, Rome, and distant frontier camps. The stars, scattered and patient, seem to watch without hurry. Across centuries, the thread of practice remains unbroken, a commitment to meeting life with presence, dignity, and compassion, even when the world feels restless and wide. And in this final quiet of the night, the philosophy that once guided emperors and exiles becomes something softer, a shelter for ordinary hearts, learning how to navigate a digital storm with calm, measured breath.